Hi, Jason. It's great to have you back again.
Hi, Karen. Yeah, awesome to be back.
I'm really interested today to talk with you about, I think the topic that we were going to discuss was meaning and truth and the logos and how some of that might apply to what is happening in the world at this very time. So, does that sound
Yes,
right?
yes. Yeah, I think, this little corner of the internet is certainly very focused on the notion of the abstract and axioms, what underpins that which we do. And the notions of what is religion, what is it to be human, really. And I was just thinking, in this age, and I have to credit, I think, John Vervaeke really for, that's the first time, I think he said it explicitly, but certainly the notion landed for me is that, we appear to be on the cusp of an AI revolution, right? So now we are thinking about, what is intelligence and what is it required to make a robot move and act in the world, which means that we start to think about, well, okay, so what are our models for robots? Well, it's ourselves, right? When we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're trying to some extent, model our own intelligence. So that very quickly, as Viveki indicated, gets down into, the idea of logic and axioms and relevance realization, which requires a filter and a worldview, which is really what religion is, right? Religion is a formalized worldview that societies have evolved over time and participate in. And that gives you a common landscape for making meaning. Because meaning, I think, and seeing as your channel's name is the meaning code, you might have thought about this more than me. I haven't thought about this too much. I'm sort of flying by the seat of my pants here, but meaning is contextual, right? So what is the meaning of an apple? Well, it depends on the context. We're talking about Newton's apple. Are we talking about Eve's apple? Is it just food, etc., etc.? What is that term that Vervaeke likes to? It's combinatorial explosion again. So our filters need to contextualize what we're talking about. So it's either an extremely broad topic or one can narrow down to very specifics, which is sort of that left brain, right brain.
Well, when you mentioned in your email about meaning being contextual, what popped off in my brain immediately was, well, yes, on the one hand, it is completely contextual with combinatorial explosiveness, and it can turn into deconstructionism very quickly, can become postmodernism very quickly because anything can mean anything.
Yes.
But then we have to find some sort of a boundary for that. Otherwise, we completely lose meaning. It gets so atomized that there's no meaning at all. And a little analogy came to me. I like your analogy about the apple. Is it Newton's apple or Eve's apple, or is it just food, or what is it? But I was thinking, I was trying to make a picture in my mind, and I thought, okay, so I'm watching a little video snippet, let's say, and in this little video snippet, imagine that a dog walks into the frame, and there's a man in the frame, and the man goes, oh, yay, dog. Okay, now maybe the man is thinking, oh, that's the dog that saved that human yesterday, and this is the hero dog. Or maybe the man is thinking, that dog would be good on the barbecue for dinner.
I was just thinking that and wondering if you were going to go there.
Or maybe the man is thinking, I could hook that dog up to a chain and I could make him work for me all day long, dragging logs, and I could use him as a slave. And, you know, we could think, okay, well, those are all valid worldviews. I mean, some people would say they're all valid worldviews, you know. Some people eat dogs, so what's the big deal? But if you change the dog to a child or to a man, another man who walks into the frame, you have the same three perspectives. Oh, that's the man that saved my daughter's life. Or, oh, that man would make a good meal. I can put him on the barbecue. Or that man would make a good slave. I could hook him up with chains. All of a sudden, something in our head goes, wait a minute. There are not alternative worldviews there. Those are not possible worldviews. One is not like the others. One is potential. The other two are obviously evil. So there has to be some sort of moral compass that's in the midst of our context making that tells us what is a possible worldview and what is not.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants here, but I think
Yes,
that I sent you a link for a video from, I think it was the World Science Fair, a festival hosted by Brian Greene with some eminent scientists there, which I found to be very, very interesting, and I'm hoping we'll be able to put up a little clip there at I think it was around about 28 minutes, where it discusses the basically what the scientific worldview is of how brains function and what purpose they serve, which could be quite interesting as to sort of formulate the discussion around. Yeah,
that's where she was talking about predictive capacity.
Yeah.
Okay, let me give it a try. I'll see if the share button works here. Can you see her?
Yes, got it.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Let's give this a try.
We say, when you ask, are we wired for beliefs? I think that can mean a couple of different things, right? So in a sense, you could say, well, all brains, actually every brain on this planet to some extent, is wired to make predictions about what's going to happen next based on what's happened in the past, right? So brains are not wired to react to things in the world. They're wired to predict. It's metabolically efficient to predict. Physiologically, most of the systems, that biological systems we have in the body, are predictive to some extent. And so if you mean, a lot of people talk about predictions, where when I say prediction, I mean, our brains, for example, change the firing of their own neurons in advance of sensory input arriving to the brain. That's how you're understanding the words that I'm speaking to you right now. You've had a lifetime of experience of patterns, encoding patterns of what these sounds refer to, and the patterns in their temporal contingencies. So all brains work like this. And if you believe that a prediction is like a belief, which scientists do write about predictions this way, as if they are beliefs or explanations that are preemptively offered to anticipate and explain incoming sensory inputs, then yes, we are wired. Another way in which we're wired, you could say, is that...
But that's for belief in things, presumably, that are demonstrably true.
That's belief in any case, right? So...
So that's probably a good place to stop for a minute and talk about that.
Yeah. So if I can go first, so just linking that back to my opening comments about AI and us being on the cusp of an AI revolution. So, so our own brains and our own understanding of how our brains work are obviously serving as the ground base from which to attempt to reproduce that in the machine world. So, and we, when I first heard that, I instantly, I just believed what she said because it resonated with me at a very deep level. We deeply value being able to predict the future, and so we have economic models forecasting. The planet has spent billions of dollars on climate models, and the whole climate change debate and the contention around that is, can we believe the models? Can't we believe the models? How well are we able to do that? And if anyone can predict the future of the stock market reliably, he would have billions of adherents in an instant, which might defeat the purpose of being able to predict the future, because anyway. So if we look at how those models work, those models will have their own understanding of how the system that they're trying to model work. It gets programmed into the model. So there's a worldview or a climate view, a climate model is generated, and the machine is programmed with that model in order to attempt to predict the future. And based underpinning those models, there are assumptions built in. So with the climate model, there's the assumption that CO2 is a greenhouse gas and will have certain effects, and then the models make predictions, and then we attempt to evaluate them depending on how the future actually plays out versus what was predicted to have played out. But so interestingly, sorry, I am rambling a bit here, but interestingly, the notion that every brain on the planet has evolved to be predictive means that every brain has essentially built up, through whatever mechanism, experience in the past, has built up a view of how the world that it inhabits is, be it the microcosmic, the small world of a small mammal, or the large or the global world and the universe as inhabited by humans. And so underpinning that is a worldview, right? And underpinning the worldview are axioms, as Peterson said. But in a sense, because certainly the higher order animals that have brains and that have been around for millions of years, that the universe is, or natural selection is essentially selecting fitness in terms of predictive capacity, right? So nature, as we experience it, is selecting fitness for the ability to predict future events. Where can I find food? Who are my friends? Who are my enemies? What's going to eat me? What can I eat? Where can I find shelter? And on it goes. And this is certainly our lived experience. We love listening to people who's going to tell us what's going to happen next. And we love to criticize them back with our own views on what's going to happen next, because our worldview is central to the way we look at the world. So this is the ocean that we swim in, right? We are essentially have competing worldviews, and over time the worldviews that are most successful in predicting the future will win out. But that happens over long time periods, which is perhaps what Paul van der Klee loves to say, religion is about the always and politics is about the now, but they're aspects of the same thing. So
Well,
let
when
me shut up there for a
the,
while.
you're talking about the competing worldviews. Yeah, I totally, I get what you're talking about. I'm tracking with you, and there's like 15 different things going off in my head at one time, so I'm going to try to rein it in and just focus on one thing. Well, maybe two things. First of all, when you're talking about our brains being prepared for predictive capacity, I think there's two different streams there. And in my mind, one stream is the very obvious part of predictive capacity. If I'm a rabbit, my brain has evolved or has been created, or whichever perspective you want to take on it, so that if I feel the earth move under my feet at a certain speed and tempo, like a certain rhythm or a certain intensity, I might, a prediction goes off in my head, there's a lion coming. You know, they don't even have to think. It's just the prediction is there. I've felt this before. I know what it means. So
Yep.
Something's coming. And that was the kind of prediction she was talking about in the video when she's talking about certain light patterns give us a visual cue. And so we know what we're going to see, or certain patterns in the air give us a sound view. So we know we're going to hear something. And based on our lived experience and based on data input that's gone into us since childhood, those things fit into the matrix of our experience and of our worldview. So that's one perspective on prediction, which I think is very obviously baked in.
Yep.
The other kind of prediction where we want to know the future, that's another level entirely, because that's where imagination comes in, and consciousness and ego and selfishness and in all of the things that make us, you know, that make us both good and bad as human beings. All of that comes into play when we start wanting to know the future, so we can get a leg up on somebody else, or we can put somebody else down, or just so that we can take care of our own families, or that's a different level of prediction. And
Yes.
I'm not saying they're not both valid. I'm just saying I think it's probably two categories.
Yeah, but the one most likely flows out of the other. So the simpler brains have developed those predictive capacities based on necessity, and somehow that capacity has developed into a whole new superpower. Some people refer to it in human beings. So we have a whole new level of doing that, and our level to abstract things which, you know, like money is often used as an example. We use money as a placeholder for real things, and it becomes a common form of exchange through social agreement. And
I thought when
we
she was talking about
do that
was
only based on agreement, right?
absolutely. I thought when she was talking about that was so interesting, that we have to have a shared communal agreement about what is going to have value for us as a community and what we're going to use to exchange, and that's where all the value of the money is. And of course, that's a horrifying thing to think about right now, because the only thing holding the world economy together is a shared communal agreement that we have an economy. And if people all of a sudden get all upset and depressed and say, oh, it's over, everything is over. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The economy will collapse in on itself just because we've removed our shared agreement about what has value to us.
Correct. And I think, as we're all sitting in our homes around the world, isolated from direct interaction, we're all contemplating this, right? And what I find particularly interesting is not the here and now, but the next step. How do we emerge from this, and what emerges from this? And we all have a sense that it's going to be different, right? It's like the world got asked the question, what do you value more, material wealth, or life and death? And it's like these two extremes got presented to us, and now, and obviously if we're all sit for fear forever because we're scared of a virus in our homes, we will die due to the lack of an economy. But if we all carry on exactly as before and elevate the economy as the be all and end all, a vast number of us may die from the virus. So it's charting those two extremes and finding the optimal middle ground. But in the meantime, you've got worldviews in individuals, and remember, your worldview is everything to you. It is what animates you. It is the most important value. It is you. Your worldview, in a sense, can be said to be you, what you are. You have the interesting capacity to change your worldview, right? But people don't really want to do that. They have to suffer before they change. Not always. I mean, there are other ways of changing your worldview. It doesn't have to be through suffering, but that seems to be a big mechanism. So now you have world leaders who have big egos, because you have to have a big ego just to put your hand up to become a leader. And you have your worldview as a world leader, and you see it in politics now, where everyone is now saying, finally, my time has come. I get to. The whole world is so scared they're going to agree with what I say within the boundaries of reason, but I can move the game in my preferred direction. This is an opportunity, and you see that happening a lot across the world, because that is what we are. So there's going to be tumults coming for sure, and they're going to. And this is why I like the notion of individual nations rather than one, this idea of one world government, because boy, if you're going down the wrong track and we're all in the same ship, when that Titanic sinks, it's going to be catastrophic. Whereas now, having diverse nations with different cultures and views, responding differently, we can in fact do lots of little experiments around the globe. And then when we see someone doing something that we think, oh, maybe we should be doing that, you get this opportunity just through diverse trial and error. There's no perfect solution, but lots of people are learning valuable things by doing different things. We can then quickly, because we have this great technology, we can relay these ideas to everyone else. So in a sense, although I'm a conservative by nature, diversity is strength in times like this, because we have lots of different experiments going on, and some will cause more harm than good, and others will cause. But then once we have sifted through all of that, we can identify the gold and share it with everyone. And that is where diversity is fantastic. So having diverse worldviews where we have not yet accurately modeled the world, we need different models in play in order to learn something new. That was a bit of a weird segue, but
well, no, I love what you said, because you've watched enough of my videos to know that I'm a big believer in boundaries.
Yes.
Because of boundaries in the art world, and how important I think boundaries are, and how diverse boundaries can be. You can have many different kinds of boundaries. You can have permeable boundaries, and you can have porous boundaries, and you can have very tight, strict boundaries. You can have very delineated boundaries. You can have fuzzy boundaries, but they all have a place, and they're useful in every level of reality. And what we've discovered through the last couple of months is that national boundaries actually are pretty important, because when something like this happens and you have to have some sort of protective barrier so that you can make determinations about how far something can go and what you need to do in order to fix it. And we're finding out very quickly as a nation in the United States that because we haven't been producing any of our own equipment and any of our own cloth and masks and things like that, it's all been outsourced. Now we don't have any way of taking care of the people within our borders, you know. So so everybody is learning a lot from this. And I'm especially thinking about when you were talking about the diversity issue, how helpful diversity is when you can look at a lot of different potential solutions. My husband is in the tech industry, and he has long said that the strength of the tech industry is that there are people from every culture working within the tech industry. And because of that, they all bring a completely different perspective to the problems. And all of those various perspectives give you new insights all the time in how to approach that problem. Where if we all thought exactly the same way, they wouldn't be able to find solutions to the problems. So
Correct. I mean, that's absolutely the case. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was just reading the national newspaper, and you know, it's politics, and the virus. And so, and I've watched a bit of what's going on in the US. So the Democrats, who are rapidly open borders, are now preventing people crossing state lines. They've gotten that keen on borders that they've, you know, taken it beyond anything that was contemplated before by the pro-borders people before the virus happened. But then similarly, you have fiscal conservatives here in Australia who have just launched the biggest fiscal stimulus in Australia's history. You know, so suddenly, you know, conservatives have become socialists when it comes to essentially bailouts, and the liberal sort of social we're all one have suddenly become very pro-borders. So we are, again, there's this flipping going on where what was previously unimaginable to your ideology has suddenly become the thing that you decide you have to implement. So you get this, suddenly you're getting, I think people are absolutely bemused that a person who used to be my enemy is suddenly agreeing vehemently with me and going beyond what I ever asked for. So there is this notion that we are in fact cross-pollinating, and we are seeing what our enemies were doing that was valuable, and we're agreeing with them, and this may just lead to an end of this partisan mudslinging that has been going on for however long, it's, you know, 10 plus years, because you know, during the Cold War, America was united against a common enemy, and the fracturing of American society happened as soon as the Cold War ended. And what this virus is it is unifying humanity against the common enemy. So that is a big plus. However, as I said, you have these strong ego, potentially tyrants in position of power with their worldviews that are and those who are aspiring to become the next tyrant, who are seeing this as the greatest opportunity ever, because there's such compliance and agreement from populations now. Let's do this, and let's all stand together, that it does. So again, like anything, there are threats and opportunities arising out of the circumstance, but it's fascinating to live through. It's
Well, for me, it's going a little bit beyond fascinating, and as I'm sure it is for you. And I think people are reluctant to talk about maybe how great the chaos actually is, because we don't want to drag each other down into a morass from which we won't be able to come back.
yes,
But I want to go back to two things. One is the AI example that you started with, and then I want to talk a little bit more about that video that we were watching. With AI, you know, they have this. I watched a really good video with Lex Friedman the other day, who is the guy who has the wonderful podcast where he always talks to AI experts. And he was talking about, I think Free Play is the name of the startup. And what Free Play is doing with AI is they set two AI systems in competition with each other. And they start out with two completely dumb AI systems. They don't know anything. And they give them a task that they need to accomplish, but they're competing against each other. And they can learn from each failure. So as they keep learning from their failures and competing with each other, the way that they kind of up the game is that they move into the backside and they insert some noise. They insert some chaos. As soon as the AI starts making progress and learning something, they go back in and they insert some noise. And that noise amps up the system somehow. I'm not exactly sure how it works because I'm not technical, but the picture is very clear to me that as a world, we were splintering, dividing off into camps. And that's one thing that was going on. And when some chaos comes into the system, it turns everything upside down. And now it's completely filled with uncertainty everywhere. And that is where all the potential lies, right? All the potential lies in the chaos and the uncertainty. On the other hand, I don't remember where this was in the video, so I can't show it on the clip, but I took a little note where the same woman, Lisa Barrett, was talking about how uncertainty is stressful for the human nervous system. And she was positing that perhaps religious beliefs came about as a way of reducing the uncertainty, because a religious belief can explain the unexplainable.
Yes, that was around about 52 minutes, 40 seconds.
Okay.
That jumped out at me as well, so it's interesting.
So what I thought was interesting about their discussion is that all five of them are admittedly atheists. They all said they were atheists.
Yes.
They made this video 10 months ago. I would like to hear some of them speaking today. And I would like to know if they are all still 100% committed atheists. Because, I mean, we've all heard the old saying that there are no atheists in foxholes. And right now we are all in a foxhole. We just don't all know that we're in a foxhole. But each of us is in a foxhole, and outside the foxhole, the world is burning down. There's war going on all around us. And there's so many aspects to that war, starting with the fear that everybody's experiencing, whether they're wealthy or poor. It cuts right through all class, it cuts right through all racial groups. It cuts right through all age groups. The fear and the then the superhuman effort that's being put forth by the people who are keeping things running for us while some of us are in our foxholes and everybody else is keeping things running. And then the suffering of the afflicted, those who have the disease, and the suffering of those who are trying to care for them. I mean, the whole of chaos that has opened up underneath us it's beyond thinking about, which is why most of us are trying not to think about it and find something else to think about. But that is what has turned the world upside down. And that is where the information lies. That's where we find out what the meaning is that's underneath this and behind it.
Yeah, and so Peterson liked to say we've got to look as high as you can, because some worldviews are small and some are large. But I think all worldviews would agree that we need to be able to eat and have shelter, right? And I mean, there were times there where I doubted that with the climate debate, because what was going on was this drive to bring in much more expensive renewable energy to save the future. There was a lack of empathy with current elderly poor pensioners who wouldn't have the ability to heat their homes in winter with this expensive renewable power. And having blackouts in midwinter during a blizzard can kill you, right? Mm-hmm. So there was even at times some debate as to whether we should sacrifice people to the future during the climate debate, using just that one narrow little example. So, but what has been interesting about this is that we pretty much have decided to value human life during this crisis. Immediately, in the here and now, let us value that and deal with the future as it unfolds. And that is, so it's almost like it has given us a bedrock of agreement about what is important. Life is important. And we'll deal with the future as it unfolds. But that's the scary part, right? That's the uncertainties. It's because we've put the flame to a lot in order to preserve life now. And will we be able to preserve life in the future as effectively as we can do right now? Will depend on our ability to agree with each other, because there are enough resources out there. This agreement is pure, so the iron ore is in the ground, the coal's in the ground, the wind will blow to generate wind power, the sun will shine. These things we have to have faith in based on past experience. It is purely how we're going to distribute those resources that end up being what we fight about on one level. So it's that agreement, and this is where we come back to the worldview, because we seem to. I mean, Australia is a fairly secular country, and I heard we have this thing called the War Memorial in Canberra, and I heard that it was a must-see, and it was a place you had to go and visit. So our whole family went down and spent hours wandering through this war memorial. And there's an actual national highway with rest stops devoted to Victoria Cross winners. So there's this commemorative highway from Sydney down to Canberra, culminating in the war memorial. And the takeaway from the war memorial is that people are prepared to die for an idea, right? We know this. And that memorial is really, that is the big takeaway. We're prepared to die for an idea. And so the abstract is something for which we're willing to give our lives for. and that's why I'm so fascinated by how this is going to shake up. What ideas are going to win the day coming out of this? But if we have valued human life, and if there are enough resources for the time being, for the foreseeable future, because there certainly was enough resources, it was purely resource allocation that's the problem. I mean, Americans and Australians, we have affluenza now. We are dying. We are making ourselves sick from having too much. So there's no shortages. It's how we allocate those resources that we argue about, which comes down to values, right? Who deserves to get more of X and more of Y? So it's going to be the debate of worldviews and abstract ideas. That the food is there, the shelter is there, the energy is there. It is how can we agree to do that? But at least we have agreed during this time that human life is key. So we agree on that. We've gone down the rabbit hole and gone and set aside our bipartisan difference, and we've agreed that life comes first. That's something we can build on. So
Well, I also think one of the other things that we have all agreed on is that human connection is vital. It's vitally important. And we had gone very far down the road of isolating ourselves in front of our personal screens and spending all our time on the internet and away from our family members. And each person in most situations, the children were on their screens playing games and the adults were on their screens doing their work. And now, by and large, people are using their screens to communicate with each other. To one guy says his 10 minutes before dinner, he Zooms his girlfriend and they dance together via Zoom for 10 minutes, and then they cook their meal together via Zoom, and then they sit down and eat their meal together via Zoom, and then they say goodnight.
Yep. Well,
that is,
yeah.
I think that's like a huge game changer. And when you see some of these internet videos of families doing songs together, or parents doing things with their children, I see in our neighborhood lots more families out taking walks together, things that I never saw before in our neighborhood. I mean, there's always been people who've been out doing their exercising, but now I see, a family of 4 out for a stroll. And I think we're seeing a lot more human connection.
Yeah, but there's some bizarre anomalies coming out where the state is running around with their police force, and you'll have an elderly couple who've been out for exercise, which you're allowed to do, but you're not allowed to sit on a park bench. Just the 2 of you, which we've atomized the social distancing down to a crowd is more than 2. So two people can stand together, but you can't sit and you can walk together, but you cannot sit together. I'm just
so you have much more stringent rules then, I guess in Australia.
Yeah. No. And interestingly enough, just on that, so Australia is an island, and then I live on an island state separate from the main island down in Tasmania. So we seem to have flattened the curve now. We've had 2 days ago, we had no new cases, and then yesterday 3 new cases, and and it was rising steadily prior to that. So they've had, because we're an island, they were able to lock down, so you can't just hop in a car and drive here. You have to either fly in or take a ferry. So their border control is simple. So we may be able to limit our total exposure to, let's say, under 100 people, which sounds fantastic, right? But where does that leave us? If almost no one has caught the virus, that means we have no herd immunity, and that means we're going to be too terrified to let anyone new into the future. So you can celebrate this victory in the short term. Yes, but how are we going to get our economy started? And this is a very much a tourism-based economy. How are we going to get our economy started if we're still terrified of bringing the fresh virus, or spreaders into the state? So and that's why I say, so there are different strategies that have been adopted. So the UK initially had a response of, let it just go and let's get herd immunity. And then they got scared by the expert to say, well, you don't know what you've just wished upon yourself. So they're going to have some version of Italy, hopefully not as bad, but in a sense, they might get back to normal quicker than an insular state like Tasmania might sit here in fear and trembling for a lot longer when everyone else has dealt with the pain, got over it, and moved on. And it's yeah.
Well, I think the hopeful thing there is I saw today that the Mayo Clinic has devised an antibody test that's going to be available on Monday. So once they can manufacture and distribute adequate numbers of antibody tests, then they can determine how many people have already had the virus. And because there may be more people in Tasmania that have had the virus, but you just don't know about it because it wasn't bad enough.
Sure. And but interestingly enough, on that, what Australia has apparently been doing, which I only read today, is we have the strongest testing regime certainly in the West. So we are testing a higher percentage of the population than any other Western nation, and so that's not and I need to be specific here. I don't think that's an antibody test. I think that's an active.
Yeah, that's I'm sure
that's the active virus test. But what that is showing is that only a tiny percentage of the population has it. So, which sort of then perhaps indicates that there are not going to be too many people that have already had it, if only a small percentage currently has it. So, but yeah, so this testing and all these tech guys working on those things, that is, bring it on. That's what we need. We need both types of testing, and we need a vaccine so that we can then unlock Tasmania from the self-imposed prison that we've, put ourselves in. Because
vaccine is at least a year away. So, that's.
Yeah. So which worries me. So in the short term we can gloat, but in the medium term I'm actually a bit more worried about how our economy is going to go. So, interesting.
Well, I think
times.
at a certain point we're going to have to just get out and face the world again, and that's when it's going to everything is going to get very, very real.
Yeah. So if I can just perhaps throw just some ideas out there, which we probably won't be able to fully discuss. But so, so scientists' worldview is that the world is intelligible to the human brain, right? That we can discover the truth, because that's why we set out to do experiments, because we have faith and belief that truth or reality is discoverable. And interestingly enough, that if natural selection is selecting to different degrees with different level organisms for predictive capacity, which means that natural selection is selecting for the best models of reality for each particular organism, that is, for all organisms that have central nervous systems. So science is essentially telling us that truth is out there, right? Which is a position of faith, which is why we do it, but we're discovering truth, and we are discovering reality, and our technology is essentially the proof of that. The fruits of that endeavor are real and useful. So so if all brains are based on worldviews, and worldviews, when you chase them down, all stand on an axiom which is taken on faith, because an axiom can only be demonstrated to be useful over time. So, I mean, Steven Pinker in that video several times boldly asserts that there is no God, but he states that as a fact. He doesn't actually realize that's a position of faith that he's making, because science can't prove that one way or the other. And that's what I found so stunning in a sense, is that when you watch that video, you see them, they are understanding the problem and they're describing it very well, but the minute it comes to their own interpretation of the world, they don't apply it to themselves. The fact that they themselves are the holders of a worldview which rests on an axiom.
Well, the thing that I found so stunning was their whole attitude. Yes, they're giving very valuable information, but the attitude with which they give it was so self-satisfied.
And smug, yeah.
Yeah, very smug, almost snarky, which I thought,
yes.
Well, if you have the truth, you don't need to be like that, you know? and the one who really I thought was kind of humorous was the anthropologist, Barbara King, because
yes.
she was talking about, well, so Lisa Barrett had mentioned that our social cohesion is something that may be one of the ways in which religion evolved. It evolved out of this social cohesion. And then Barbara King comes along and she says, well, you're being very human exceptionalist when you talk like that, because you're saying that we should only look at what goes on with humans. She said, you can perfectly well look at what goes on with animals. Take orcas, for example. Orcas are exquisitely cohesive and cooperative, and they can do that just fine without God. And I thought, how on earth do you know that they're doing that without God?
Oh God, exactly. I mean, how many spouses go through life not having a clue that the other one's having an affair, you know? I mean, we are so impenetrable to each other, and we hold our secrets so deeply, and our true selves are so deeply buried, even from our own knowledge, that and to me, you know, this idea of axioms underpinning everything. If we're on the cusp of an AI revolution, where we're going to be widely disseminating the idea that you cannot act without having a worldview, and that worldview rests on an axiom, is that we need to start figuring out, each of us, what our own worldview actually is. In other words, don't look at what we say. Talk is cheap, as Peterson likes to say. Is we can only look. If you want to gain self-knowledge, look at your wants, desires, and actions. They will give you a clue as to what your actual core belief system is. And yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, and we have examples of different belief systems resulting in different outcomes. We can then evaluate whether we're on the path of the highest good or not. And that self-knowledge and self-awareness can become, and if that mode of thinking can be spread out from, because this corner of the internet seems to have a pretty good handle on that. And what was so stunning was that these scientists were disseminating the knowledge of that without the self-awareness that they themselves must therefore operate on that basis. And they were just asserting that, no, of course we're right, and everyone else are, you know, just idiots for believing stuff, but they themselves are standing on faith. So yeah, and just some humility again.
And what I mean, I want them to have that conversation in an environment like today, when they have no answer whatsoever to give people who are being crushed right now.
Yes.
I mean, I'm thinking about this testimony that I read the other day online of these doctors in Italy. And these doctors said that they were atheists when they went into this, and very intent on their atheism. They felt perfectly satisfied that science answered all their questions. And then they started treating all these coronavirus patients, and somewhere along the line, a priest came in there in his mid-70s with coronavirus, and he brought in God's word and began sharing God's word with the different patients and bringing them some hope and some meaning to their days, and a way to die with some sort of dignity and meaning and value. And over time, these doctors just watched that in amazement. And eventually, many of them came to faith because they saw they had nothing to offer. When they ran out of ventilators and they ran out of medical equipment, they had nothing more to give to bring comfort to these people who were dying. So when you're in this kind of an environment, that snarky worldview of science answers all your questions, well, no, not really. There are a lot of things that are unexplainable. And this kind of chaos and uncertainty is completely unexplainable. And if there isn't a God who's got this well in hand, you know, it goes somewhat beyond unexplainable. I wake up every morning thankful that there is a God and I am not he, because I wouldn't have a clue as to what to do in this situation, but I know he understands it all, and he can bring meaning and purpose and beauty out of it all in the end, some way. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I trust and believe that it will.
Yeah. It's perhaps this is something that some of your other contributors can answer for me. I don't know, because this is not a sphere of expert. I don't know anything about this, but this notion of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, that essentially we are, without adding energy to a system, we're running down the clock of the universe, as it were. However, where does information fit into that? Because as the world runs down its clock, as the world plays out what it's playing out, is what we are gaining. What we may be lacking, what we may be losing in potential and energy, we are gaining in information, because we are literally observing what is happening, and through that observation, being observers of this real world, we are gaining information out of that. And where does information theory, so through pain and suffering and this lived experience, we are gaining experience and knowledge of how the world actually is, right? And then we apply that to the future. We expand our worldviews so it is the net. So this is where I'm going with this. Is the end view desolation, where the world is run out, or has the information that we are gaining about how reality actually works, does that eventually create a paradigm shift where we break through into a new paradigm? You see where I'm going with this?
Well, when you say when it all comes to an end, are you talking about like the heat death of the universe at the very, very end,
well,
15 billion years?
Well, that's
or are you talking about
that, Yeah. So that's the current worldview, right? That's the current scientific model of the world is the ultimate worldview. But I'm just wondering whether in the short term, whether the information gained by the world playing out its laws, because yeah, okay, so let's take this as an example. Is that so? The Earth is bathed in the energy of the sun. So we have got a short term or medium term or long term, however you want to view this. We have got an energy source that is from a live person's point of view, it's inexhaustible. It's more than sufficient, and we have been able to grow human civilization from tiny bands roving around, leaving Africa however long ago, to this essentially being able to inhabit every ecosystem on the planet, and doing so. Some would say to overcapacity, others would say not even close to capacity yet, depending on, again, your worldview and what you think is possible. And that, their dreams of launching us out to the moon, to Mars, and beyond, those dreams have been around for 70 odd years or however long. And people are acting on those dreams and investing money in order to do that. And whether we will be able to, won't be able to, will unfold in the future. But certainly in human history, what we are seeing is that as we gain information with a constant energy supply, is that we can do more. So what does information theory say, and how does it fit into the second law of thermodynamics? Is that so far under a constant energy supply, we have been able to do more as we gain information. So at the moment, the heat death of the universe is the model, but we don't know what information we will learn down the track to possibly circumvent that, because we're building theories about black holes and all these other things. That is an assumption. We don't know that because we haven't yet experienced it, so time will tell, right? So I'd just like to see in the world that we're currently living in, I'd like someone to explain to me, and somebody like Carl might know this, how information theory, because information opens up new potential, right? Which we weren't aware of before. It expands our horizons and grows the boundaries of your worldview of what is possible.
Well, if we go back to
therefore
what Peterson says, if we take Jordan Peterson's viewpoint, the inside order, there is no new information. Inside order, all the information has been incorporated, utilized, ossified, become rigid, crystallized, inside order. But when chaos opens up, that opens a space for new information. That opens the space for the unknown, the things that we don't know yet. Okay. Now,
correct.
Information entropy, as I understand it, entropy is the dissipating or the spread outness or the moving apart from of particles of energy. And I have thought a lot about that thing too. For example, when you think about the beginning of the universe with the Big Bang, and you think about E equals mc squared, does that mean, so when the universe began, all potential energy that is there must have come at the same time that the energy came? I mean, there's no place else for information to be except within our universe, because this is where we are. We're inside this universe. So the Big Bang happens, and out comes all the energy that's available to us and all the information. So is there some way in which information and energy are the same thing? I've thought about that a lot, because light is energy. You know, we get the light from the sun. That's energy. Is that also information?
Well, it certainly transmits information, that we know. But then everything, you know, molecules transmit information, matter transmits information.
So are you talking information there, or are you talking data? When you say molecules transmit information, or do they transmit data, or do they, you know, maybe we need to define terms between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, because I think those are 4 different categories.
Yes, certainly. So I'm going to waffle too much here, so I'm going to bow out of this conversation, but I would love to learn more about this, because it is fascinating, right? Because,
well, let's set that up so that we can find we'll find somebody who can talk to us about information entropy and the differences between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Because I think that there's really something there to be had, and it would be a great conversation. If you want, I can loop you in on the conversation, or it can just be one you listen to.
I'll probably just listen to that. I'll be too loose to contribute anything meaningful.
Well, so if anybody's listening to this right now and they have something to add in that category, I would love to talk to you.
Goodbye.
Yeah. So,
okay, Karen, I think I'm probably exhausted on this. I don't know if there's.
It was great. It was great talking to you. It was just great. It's so good to be able to talk to somebody, first of all, about things that are really interesting and that are important, but also to kind of connect it with what's going on right now, but not in a way that is desperate and hopeless, because it's way too easy to go down that path. And instead to think about what are the potential goods that can come out of this and how we can help each other. And so it's been very
well. If I can give you a shout out on that, I think I heard in your last talk with Michael, or maybe the previous one, that you're potentially feeling a little bit down, but this time that you devote to talking to people and making yourself available to do this in this corner of the internet, out of which we're all so passionately following, is just a beacon of light. So if I can doff my metaphorical cap to you and everyone else in the space, well done, well done. So for getting the energy and just getting off your butt and figuring out how to set up your own little YouTube channel and doing it is super. So I love it. I mean, I don't know if I would call. I would, if pushed, I would call myself a Christian. I don't go to church because you guys and Paul Vanderklay are my pastor. I mean, this is where I hang out, and it's sad in a sense that I'm an insular person, but this is just awesome. So I love what you guys are doing. So well done.
Well, it's just great talking to you, Jason. And I look forward to our next conversation, which is going to come when you let me know that you're ready with.
Yep.
Okay.
That other thing.
Yeah, that other thing.
Okay, Karen, thanks so much. And keep your chin up. I'm very optimistic about the future, and you adding to my optimism. So Good on.
Okay. Have a great day.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.